We can only imagine. Because if we're to see it out there, we have to see it in here. And before we can see it in here, we have to see it in here. Before we can see it, we must see it. Imagine that. We don't know what the future holds, but we do know who holds the future. God is. We are not fortune tellers, but we do know that one of the outcomes of Tuesday's election will cause greater misfortune for the already unfortunate. On this All Saints Sunday, the ghosts of the 2016 election ought to haunt us. And the anxiety that we feel in our bodies today is holy. A holy and righteous kind of worry, because our spirits are unsettled. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God, and blessed are we who are worried and concerned. Blessed are we who protest and resist and will not be complacent and are not willing to accept things as the way they are. Blessed are we who, with our mind's eye and our hearts, we see things as they ought to be. While we are not the type of prophets who can see the future, we are the type of prophets who imagine a new one. And the future that we tell is one where fortunes are not the possessions of a privileged few. The futures that we see and that we imagine is a world where all have enough to eat, because the earth actually produces enough to feed everybody, if we only imagine. We envision a world where there is affordable and safe housing, shelter for all. If we only imagine. We imagine a world where our bodies are honored in their uniqueness and their diversity, as we come in many forms and shapes, many genders and sexualities. If we only imagine. We imagine a world where wars cease and troubles end. And we hear the words of the psalmist that says, God is a refuge and strength, an ever-present help in the time of trouble. A little bit later in the song, in verse 4, the psalmist continues, God is in the midst of the city. God is in the midst of the nation. And God is in the midst of the world. And God is the creator of all things, so that there is nothing that is too hard for God and that stands outside of the possibility of God's creation. Therefore, because God is the creator of all things, we can get in the midst of trouble when we know that God is in the midst of it all. We can be so bold as to proclaim in faith that yes, everything's going to be all right. Because God is. These are comforting words from Psalm 46 during these anxious times as we stand on the edge of a monumental election, regardless of the outcome of the 2024 election. We do know this, that the years ahead will be challenging because the nation is split right down the middle, divided in two, and it shouldn't even be this close. But yet it's too close to call. We know the pollsters have the election within a margin of error. Yet and still there's a message of hope that speaks to us today. And it's one that meets us and greets us where we might be cautiously optimistic and yet still never naive. It's the type of hope that greets us that was spoken by one of the ancestors, W.E.B. Du Bois, as he remembered the passing of his firstborn and wrote in the souls of Black folk as we stand in the echo of All Souls Day and All Saints Day and Halloween, that there is, he wrote, there is a hope that is not hopeless, but it is unhopeful. There's a hope that is not hopeless, but it is unhopeful, that greets us as we wait and as we vote. And God is our refuge and our strength, ever-present help in the time of trouble. And God is in the midst of the election, in the midst of the city, the midst of a nation, even in the midst of our world. On this All Saints Sunday, preceding Election Tuesday, I have on my mind Barbara Diane Savage's "Your Spirits Walk Beside Us," the politics of Black religion. Though the ancestors have crossed over the River Jordan, they still yet remain here with us, and we carry them in our hearts. Psalm 46 verse 4 says, yes, there is a river that makes glad the city of God. There is a stream that flows from the highest of mountains and that greets us even when we find ourselves in the valley. On this All Saints Day, I am also reminded of verse 2 of Charles Wesley's hymn, "Let Saints on Earth in Concert Sing," because he says, one family we dwell in Christ, one church above, beneath, though now divided by the stream, the narrow stream of death. On the one hand, I am reminded during this season of Halloween and Dias de los Muertos, where time and space is thin and the ancestors draw near to us this season, yes, that narrow is the stream of death, as the ancestors dwell with us. And on the other hand, as Election Day draws near, still that narrow is the stream of death, because lives hang in the balance, particularly during this season and all that is ahead for the undocumented and for refugees, for those who seek to have choice over their bodies but have to flee from one state to another, and those women whose bodies, narrow is the stream of death for those who just yearn for the simplest of a safety net. That when the privileges and the inequities that are structurally built into this world disadvantage them to the place where they cannot even, where they have to make choices between Will I fill my prescription and be able to afford the copay, or do I eat tonight? Or pay my rent? Or pay the telephone bill that allows me to remain connected to family separated by time and space? On this All Saints Sunday, speaking to us from beyond the grave are those great cloud of witnesses, theologians from Jürgen Moltmann, who passed this year on June 30th, who made famous this theology of hope with a text of the same name. On my mind today, the great cloud of witnesses, Gustavo Gutierrez, who passed October 22nd, who popularized a theology of liberation, that Peruvian, brilliant trailblazer. On my mind, speaking to us beyond the grave, is the great cloud of witnesses from Toni Morrison, beloved, to James Cone, which would help us on this day to shape a worldview that will continue to speak and teach in the midst of the difficult days that yet are ahead, no matter which way the election turns. It's a liberation theology of hope that is grounded squarely in a prophetic politics of Black religion that produces a very clear platform that speaks to the issues of today: women's rights, economic opportunity, affirmative action, and immigration. While we won't delve fully into it today, let me just say a little bit about this liberation theology of hope, that when we take stock of the divine feminine that is within our midst, it gives us insight on the policing of women's bodies and the attempt to diminish a woman's right to choose. When we lean into a liberation theology of hope that is grounded in the scriptures, we begin to wrestle with the fact that God witnesses to us in the scriptures a commonwealth that would have us to lean into an opportunity economy. This liberation theology of hope always speaks to God's preferential option for the poor, and affirmative action that would advance us from not simply equality, but to equity. Liberation theology of hope that speaks to us about open borders and not securing them. On Easter Sunday, we lean into the holiness of the divine feminine, and we learn that the resurrection hope that lives within us is about the good news according to St. Mary Magdalene. Let's be clear, if it wasn't for the women, there would be no Easter. Although resurrection would have happened, there would not have been anyone to tell the story if it weren't for the women. Right, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene helps us to think differently about the choices that we make and those things that some would call sin. But we began to unpack theologically, grounded in the scriptures, that there is yet another way to think about these things. Because look, you can't believe, actually we can believe what we want, but you can't, right, but you can't believe, right? You can believe what you want about an unborn fetus, but you don't get to call it pro-life when you ignore, or better yet, participate in the systematic murder of Black people at the hands of white supremacist police. And you participate in the attempted erasure of trans people by transphobic heterosexists. And you participate in the suffocation of poor people from environmental racism. And you participate in the ongoing genocide of indigenous people by contemporary colonizers.
Sunny.
You don't get to claim life when you routinely ignore it. And when you choose not to do the right thing, you're doing wrong. And if we're honest, to speak of the Commonwealth, if we're honest, Bible-reading Christians would acknowledge that the scriptural vision that unfolds in resurrection and Pentecost is one where there is a commonwealth. One might think about it about like economic socialism, not capitalism, is God's hope for the world. Read the Bible. Acts chapter 2, verse 42 says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. And everyone was filled with awe and the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. And all the believers were together and had everything in common. And they sold their possessions and their property to give to anyone who was in need. Now, none of the presidential candidates are promoting economic socialism, to be sure, but Christians have a moral obligation to align with the vision that is closest. This opportunity economy that Kamala has set forth that requires, right, taxation of the most privileged to provide the most basic of a social safety net for those who are systemically and structurally disadvantaged. The trailblazing Peruvian liberation theologian Gustavo Gutierrez helps us to think about affirmative action and what's at stake. Because he makes the case that God makes a choice and that there is a preferential option for the poor that is revealed in the scripture. James Cone makes it that God is the God of the oppressed and stands on the side of the oppressed, which is to say, in a world that is structurally disadvantaging some, there must be a choice, and it's a divine choice, to follow the God who broke into time to be with us and to suffer and to die, that we have to make a choice to be in radical solidarity and to affirm the right to life for those who the system would kill. Look, and I'm going to be done. We know the language. We know the language of securing the borders is thinly veiled racism and xenophobia, or not so thinly, right? But it ignores basic history and elementary theology. Germans and Irish and English, they came from somewhere, right? And when so-called Christians talk about securing the border, it plainly also ignores the biblical truth that Jesus was an immigrant who fled Palestine for fear of his life because the empire of King Herod wanted him to die. And now as the empire is trying to strike back, we must acknowledge that a true Jesus-following politic demands solidarity and compassion for the migrant. For it is written in Hebrews, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, to immigrants. For by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. As the spirits of our theological ancestors and freedom fighters walk beside us on this All Saints Sunday ahead of Election Tuesday, shaping liberation theology of hope. The close of service will sing, I've got a feeling that everything's going to be all right. This is not to say that we know the outcome of the election, but we do know this, by all means. We are not fortune tellers, but we do know this. Whatever happens, we're going to be all right because we've got each other. And we are not alone. And the ancestors who sang this song, this spiritual, amidst the civil rights movement and amidst Jim Crow and amidst slavery, they knew something, that they had each other and God was right there in the midst. But for now, we'll sing this song. It's hymn number 534. It's based on Psalm 46. Be still, my soul. The Lord is on our side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to our God to order and provide. In every change, God faithful will remain. Be still, my soul. Be still and know that God is God. Your best, your heavenly friend, through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul, your God will undertake to guide the future as in ages past. Your hope, your confidence, let nothing shake. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, our soul. The waves and winds, they know the Christ who ruled them while he dwelt below. So be still as we wait. Be still as we know that everything's going to be all right. Because God is in the midst of it all. And God is.